Hey guys, Dylan from Noble Records coming at you with another video. One question I get a lot is how to identify whether you have a first pressing of a record or not, or how to identify what pressing a record is. So this video, we're just going to go over some of the ways that you can determine, what pressing that record is that you have that you're trying to determine the value of or whatever. So I'm going to probably refer to a few things in this video, a few resources. I'll go ahead and get those out of the way so you'll know what I'm talking about. The first one being Discogs. We say Discogs. A lot of people use Discogs. It's a website, discogs.com. A lot of people use for information, and it's just like an encyclopedia of records. It's got almost every record pressing out there on the website with all the information and everything, so you can use that to your advantage. That's probably the best resource when you're trying to determine what pressing you have. As far as the value is concerned, another resource I use a lot is popsych.com. Basically, the entire purpose of popsych.com is to determine the value of a record. It's got auction results dating all the way back probably 2005, maybe. I've seen some like 2004. Just auction results from eBay of determining what these records are going for. Now the market has fluctuated a lot since then. You guys know that. So anyways, that resource is pretty much just for determining the value of a record, because when you look at the sold listings on eBay, you only get like the past month or two. Also, just a side note, what people are asking for records, like the price that if you go on eBay and you see somebody what they're asking for a record, that does not mean that that's what that record's worth. That means that's what that person would like to get for that record. I've seen $2 records that people are asking $100 for on there, stuff like that. So those listings are meaningless. So anyways, we'll get into identifying your record that you're looking at. So PopPsych, like I said, you can type in you could just type in the record. Like if it was Michael Jackson Thriller, you could type that in and it's going to give you like every single copy that is on CD, cassette, vinyl, 8-track, whatever. It's going to give you every media format. So you got to be able to cut that down to determine which one you have. So I've got a lot of identifiers here that we're going to go through and talk about to kind of help you identify which one you have. So the number one thing that's probably pretty obvious is the catalog number. I'm going to use this Free Willin' Bob Dylan as an example. So the catalog number on here, you'll see, you can usually find it on the spine, and then sometimes it's even on the cover, and it's always on the label as well. So with this label, it's a CL1986 is the catalog number. So when you get a catalog number, every label has a different series of numbers, just like this Nick Drake record. The AN, the Antilles label, it's AN 7028 is the catalog number for that one. So that basically tells you what release that is on that label. Sometimes that can give you, most of the time it'll give you kind of like a range of which year and which issue that is. But a lot of times if you're looking at first pressing, second pressing, sometimes it can be the same catalog number. So that doesn't cut it down too much. So the catalog number is one thing that can kind of help you track down some information on it, but it's not going to tell you the exact pressing most of the time. Sometimes it will, sometimes it won't. So it's not something I would probably rely on. What is the best way to know the exact pressing you have is the matrix numbers. Now on a record, right next to the label, so you have this, what they call that is the dead wax. So the space in between the last groove and the label, there's just an area that doesn't have anything, no grooves. That is your dead wax. And in that, you can see a little number etched in there. There's all types of stuff in this area, but this is a wealth of knowledge if you're trying to find out what pressing you have. Some matrix numbers are very vague and they only give you a little bit of information. Some give you a lot of information. Some of them you'll even be able to tell what pressing plant it came from and all that stuff. So that's where you're going to find the best information. You can type that matrix number in on Discogs. Most of the time it'll bring up pretty much the exact one you've got. So that's a great identifier. There are symbols a lot of times etched in there. Sometimes it's etched, sometimes it's handwritten, sometimes there's secret messages. Like the band will put something funny in there or whatever. Like you never know. So that's kind of a way that you can get some more information about it. But a lot of times, you know, notoriously Led Zeppelin 2 has the Robert Ludwig pressing that everyone looks for that has a RL in there that kind of lets you know that that's what pressing that is. So there's a lot of information you can find on the matrix numbers. The symbols mean things. It'll tell you who mastered it sometimes. So all that you can research and see what that symbol means. Like different pressing plants have different symbols on all that stuff as well. So that is where you're going to find a lot of your information also. Now, probably the most obvious thing that you can see on a record other than the cover is the label. And the label can sometimes tell you, narrow down kind of what pressing it is as well. Different record labels had different label variations throughout the years. So there's a lot of good information on the label. I'll use Bob Dylan as an example again. So this is Bob Dylan's first record, and it's got the promo sticker on it, the Columbia promo sticker. A lot of times promos are first pressings, but not always. Sometimes they did promos for reissues as well. So you can't always, I've heard it both ways, but I've seen a lot that are not actually first presses. But most of the time they are. So this Bob Dylan, right in the time that this album came out, only the very first pressings have the 6i. So if you talk about the Columbia label, they call this a 6i because there's 6 of those little Columbia logos on there. So this is the early 60s, late like 50s, early 60s, up to like 62. They did this 6i. And then this was the last record that Bob Dylan's had on the 6i, and like I said, only the first pressings have it. If you have a 6i of this, it's really rare and worth more than you probably think. But this album came out afterwards, and it's got what they call the Columbia 2i. So this is not a lesson on Bob Dylan, but the 2i is, see the two little Columbia labels. That's just the record collector slang, but that tells you where that record lands as far as their label catalog is. If you look at this label, this is Self-Portrait, Bob Dylan's Self-Portrait. This is also on Columbia, but notice that this label is totally different because that's a UK press. So that'll tell you what country it's from. Sometimes the countries have different labels as well. And then I'll also show you like what a later Columbia, this is Bob Dylan's record, Saved. And this is going to give you the later Columbia look. So it's got that orange text around there. So that's your, 80s-ish Columbia label. So the variation of the label can tell you a lot of things as far as like what year it came out and all that stuff. That's a great indicator. Now that's just Columbia. We're just talking Columbia there. When it comes to jazz, like Prestige and Blue Note, they have very slight variations in the label. Like the addresses are different. Like you want to look for certain addresses for certain years. So all that can get really confusing and really complicated. But the important thing is when you're doing research, if like you're on Discogs, you can look at the pictures of the labels and you can determine, even if it's a slight difference, it's a different pressing. So that's where you're going to see a lot of information on those labels that you're going to need to know to tell you what year that is. Another big thing in determining what pressing you have and the value is what country was the country of manufacture, where it was pressed. So a lot of times UK pressings can be worth a lot more than US pressings. Not always, but a lot of times it seems to be that way. Like Japanese pressings can be really obvious. Like this is a Japanese pressing with their OBI right there. But a lot of times you have to look for it. So it'll say it sometimes on the back cover, sometimes it'll say it in the gatefold, sometimes it'll say it on the label. So you just kind of got to look for where the country of manufacture is. And sometimes there's like little words around the edge of the label that tell you information of what year and where it was pressed and all that stuff. So all that comes into play when you're determining the value and you're determining what pressing you have. Some countries sound better and some sound worse depending on what record you're talking about and all that stuff. So all that stuff comes into play on determining things. Another big one that I see when I'm looking on, sometimes if I'm looking on eBay or something like that, sometimes if I'm in a record store, I'll see a record that says like first pressing. Like recently I saw one It said first pressing, and it was Velvet Underground and Nico, which, you know, it had a barcode on the back of it. So I'm like, okay, barcode. Big, big, big thing to look for. Sometimes, newsflash, record stores don't know what they're talking about. Sometimes the owners really know what they're talking about, but sometimes you got people that are just getting into it and they're doing the best they can, but they don't have all the appropriate knowledge. A lot of times online sellers, they're just getting into it. They don't have all the knowledge that they need. And so they'll think something looks really early, so they'll say, oh, it's a first press. But a lot of times I will see things that are supposed to be pressed in like 66, 67, 70, and it'll have a barcode on it. And so it doesn't. The earliest a barcode was ever used was maybe 79, but mostly 1980 and on. I think there's a few records in 79 that had them. But as far as I can tell, usually 1980 and upward, some have barcodes, some don't. But if there is a barcode, you know it's not super early, as far as if you're looking for like a classic record. And that's something that people goof on all the time. And like all the times I'll see on eBay, somebody say, hey, this is a first pressing of this and there's a barcode, you know, that's a huge thing. So look for the barcodes. I know it's like glaringly obvious, but that's something I had to point out because it's an error that I do see quite a bit. So sometimes there can be different covers and different markings on covers and all that stuff. Sometimes there's banned covers that they withdrew to reissue it in a different, you know. So for instance, I've got this one, this Grateful Dead Anthem of the Sun. This was a completely different mix than this Grateful Dead Anthem of the Sun. And this one's a little bit tougher to find, but this is in the white and this is in the purple. So that's just kind of like an indicator. Most of the time, the cover doesn't come into play that much, but occasionally you can determine which pressing from the cover occasionally. But that's just one thing, obviously, that you would look at. Another thing is like colored vinyl. I know this sounds crazy, but a few years ago, people started probably 2012, 2013, when a lot of people were getting back into vinyl and a lot of people didn't know what they were buying. I was seeing like bootlegs and stuff, counterfeits pop up of like Pink Floyd stuff and Led Zeppelin stuff, and it would be like on yellow vinyl or blue vinyl or something. Very, very, very seldomly did like a lot of those earlier records get put on color vinyl. Sometimes they did. Like some jazz records, especially on Fantasy label, would come out on red vinyl or blue vinyl or something like that. And some of the 45s did too. That's an exception. But a lot of times those earlier ones didn't come on color vinyl. A lot of times. Sometimes they did. Like I do have an early Pink Floyd Animals that's on pink vinyl, and it came that way. But you just kind of got to look and do some research, because you can't just say, oh, wow, that's a, you know, there's a lot of counterfeits out there. So if it seems like, you know, you've got this, I mean, I remember I saw somebody post on Instagram once, like, this Led Zeppelin 2 on splatter vinyl, it's original press. And I'm like, no, dude, that's not an original. You know that. So that kind of leads me to my next and final point. That is common sense. Common sense plays a huge factor whether you can decide something's a first pressing or not. I think sometimes people say, oh, this is an original press or this is a first press, and they might have some suspicions, you know. A lot of times for me, I can hold a cover in my hand and know just about when it was pressed, because I've had so many records. I can tell. You know, there's no substitute for experience. You know, the more you're acquainted with records, the more you're around them, the more you can identify which is which. Now, when it comes to a year or two, sometimes it's tough to tell, but like, you know, the jackets in the 90s are way different than the jackets now, and way different than the jackets in the 80s, and way different. Every decade, the jackets are totally different. The way that they're printed, and even the countries, like whatever country they're from, like usually UK pressings have a little bit flimsier jacket. German pressings are a little flimsier, usually, not always, but most of the time. And so a lot of that goes into, you know, experience is a huge factor, but just use your common sense. I always say this. This is my number one thing. If you're trying to buy a record, you're trying to determine, you know, is this a good deal? Is this an original press? All that stuff. Slow down, take your time, do some research, and then decide from there. Because a lot of times people get, they get antsy and they get excited. I mean, and I do it too. I will say I've done it recently done it, that I see a record that I get really excited about and I pull the trigger on it without realizing, oh, wait, I didn't look at the label close enough, or I didn't look at the matrix number close enough, and this isn't the exact pressing I thought it was. So that's just something that it can happen to anybody. take your time, use some common sense. Like I said, the barcode thing's a common sense. There's no barcodes in 1967. You know that. I thank y'all so much for watching this video. I hope this helped you get a little bit of a better grasp on it. If you have any questions, feel free to reach out to me or send your comments below. I love to see what you guys are thinking. This is just meant to be a resource to you and maybe help you guys out while you're out there digging. If you enjoyed this video, hit the subscribe button. Follow us on Instagram. I have a record store in North Carolina where we're always getting some new cool stuff, finding collections, all that. So follow us on Instagram. And thank y'all so much for your support. We will see you next time.